Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to the stately Vaughn Manor. And it's Wednesday, that means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, I'll talk about a graphic novel, comic book, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue on his channel will talk about the same graphic novel, comic book, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we have once a week. And this week, we're talking about the Avengers. This is the Avengers Epic Collection Once an Avenger. So this is the Avengers. This is the volume. This is volume 2 of the Avengers Epic Collections. This volume contains the Avengers stories from Avengers 21 through 40, which took place in 1965 through 1967. So we've got a bunch of mid-60s Avengers stories here. And I wanted to revisit this time in the Avengers. We just did a read-along. Steve Donoghue, Maybe Book Club, and myself, we just did a read-along of Avengers Forever. And that made me want to revisit some of the earlier Avengers stories. Steve Donoghue and I have already talked about the first volume of Avengers, the first volume of the Avengers Epic Collections. So I thought, you know what? Let's check out volume 2 and see what's going on with those guys, the Avengers. This is an interesting time for the Avengers. As this volume starts, the original Avengers have disbanded. All the original Avengers quit. And we're left with these guys. Captain America, Hawkeye, who was a villain 5 minutes ago, Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch, they were also kind of villains 5 minutes ago. And this guy's still a villain. That's Dr. Doom, and he's not having any part of this. But we're left with these 4 superheroes on this team. And this is a drastically underpowered Avengers team, as they are well aware. They know that they're underpowered. The most powerful member of the Avengers at this point is the Scarlet Witch, but no one will admit it because she's a girl. So let's just pretend that the Scarlet Witch isn't like way more powerful than all of these other characters. Basically, at this point, she just makes people trip and makes things fall over. But she's got tremendous power, Scarlet Witch, and it's pretty obvious even then. They just never use the powers that often for anything, fantastic. But she's certainly more powerful than this band of knuckleheads here. Now, we do have Captain America, who has a ton of experience and can beat anybody up because, he's Captain America. But, he has no real superpowers. And we've got Hawkeye, who just hates Captain America at this point. He just hates him. There is a lot of outright fighting in the team at this point. Now, unlike the Fantastic Four, you've got the Fantastic Four, another band of 4 superheroes, who are always bickering in the early Fantastic Four issues. But the difference is that with the Fantastic Four, you always get a sense that they really care about each other and that they are a family. And they will always work together as a solid unit because they are a family. A bickering family, but a family. You get nothing like that with the Avengers. These guys just hate each other in the beginning, or at least at this part of the Avengers saga. When they made the change, when the original Avengers disbanded and we got this underpowered team, I wonder what it must have been like when you first read these stories and not knowing how it was going to turn out. It was interesting. It's interesting to read them, though, because the stories actually improve once you get this band of Avengers, this depowered band. Suddenly, the comic book becomes more interesting. You start to wonder what's going to happen with this team. And they outright fight. Like, Hawkeye can't stand Captain America. Captain America is just annoyed by Hawkeye all the time because Hawkeye's a dick. And you've got Quicksilver, who's not much better than Hawkeye, really. I mean, he's not as annoying, but he still kind of thinks he should run things. The only member of the Avengers who's not a total asshat is probably Scarlet Witch. Even Captain America, who normally keeps it together, loses his cool a lot. And really, why wouldn't he? He has to deal with Hawkeye, who's just such a jerk at this point. And I love Hawkeye. I always loved Hawkeye. He's just so much fun to read about. As much of a dick as he is in these early stories, he's tremendous fun to read about, Hawkeye. I mean, all this guy can do is shoot arrows. Some of them blow up. But he makes up for any deficiencies he has as a superhero just by being so fun to read about. He's tremendous fun, Hawkeye. And I really like Hawkeye a lot. And that's one of the reasons I enjoyed this Avengers Epic Collection so much, is just that Hawkeye plays such a prominent role in these issues. In fact, as you start off with some artwork, this is all Don Heck in here. But we do get these earlier issues inked by Wally Wood, and he makes everything magic when he inks it. He's just such a great artist, Wally Wood. And he works really well with Don Heck. The artwork just looks fantastic. And so we've got Hawkeye changing a fuse, and Captain America has to come in and be all like such a dick. It's like, don't change that fuse, Hawkeye. Only Tony Stark can change the fuses. And Hawkeye's like, dude, shut up. And so they start fighting right away. Now, in this initial story, got Quicksilver has to jump in between them. In this initial story, we have this second-rate bad guy in a jungle who used to work for Baron Zemo. He stumbles upon the laboratory where Wonder Man was turned into Wonder Man. He meets up with the Enchantress, and the Enchantress helps him turn into a supervillain called Power Man. And Power Man and the Enchantress are going to get revenge on the Avengers. And that's really easy to do because they're just going to tear apart the team and make them look like a dangerous band of jerks. It's real easy for them to do that because the Avengers can't get along for like 5 minutes. And so it's really easy to take them down by trickery and deceit. And because they're already having a tremendously stressful time just trying to be any kind of team at this point. And so they're easily broken up. They do come back together because, above all else, they are Avengers and they do have a duty to the Avengers and to humanity. But they are still a drastically underpowered team. They have a few more Avengers. They run into Kang the Conqueror. Once again, it's always cool to catch up with Kang. So we get a pretty cool Kang story in here. We also have the Avengers, for the first time, meeting up with Doctor Doom as the Avengers. Or as this band of Avengers, anyway. They have a few more adventures before the return of Giant Man. Back at last, Giant Man, or Goliath. At this point, he's Goliath. So that is how they solve the problem of being a depowered team, or an underpowered team, is that they bring back Giant Man, or Goliath, as he's known here, in issue 28. And he comes to them because the Wasp, they retired for some reason, Ant-Man / Giant Man and the Wasp. But the Wasp had to come out of retirement because there was some trouble, and then she runs into trouble, so Giant Man has to step back in, Henry Pym. And the problem is, at this point, his changing size, it's damaging his health. And so he had to stop being Giant Man. As he explains, one of the reasons I resigned from the Avengers was I realized that changing size so often was dangerous to my body. The unimaginable strain might someday be fatal. So it might someday be fatal. I know I've got to convince you no matter what. Because, like, they don't realize that they didn't know his secret identity at this point. It's not like the later Avengers where everybody knows who everybody is. At this point, they had secret identities even to each other. So he's got to convince Captain America that he's actually, that guy he used to know, Giant Man. I can only attain one height now, 25 feet. I dare not vary my sizes as I did before. And I must remain that height for 15 minutes. If I change any sooner or any later than that, the strain can be too much. But now stand back. Now he gets a costume, which was handily created already by the Scarlet Witch because, she's a girl and she sews, I guess. And so he has a stretchy costume and he automatically transforms into the character henceforth known as Goliath. And they're like, oh yeah, you are Giant Man. It's sort of annoying that Stan Lee did this where he made it so like, oh, he can only be this one height now and he can only do it for 15 minutes. And he has to be Giant Man for 15 minutes. He adds all of these limitations on Giant Man or Goliath. And so throughout this epic collection, we have all kinds of Giant Man troubles. Giant Man's having trouble with his size. Giant Man's passing out because he was Giant Man too long, or Goliath. I mean, all through the epic collection, he's having issues. At one point, he's stuck big. He can't get small for a while. I mean, he has a lot of issues, this guy. And it explains, I think, why he's one of the more troubled Avengers. Poor Dr. Pym. The Wasp is back on the team, and she is much more stable and together than poor Giant Man is. But Giant Man is necessary, man, because he's the brawn. He's the strength of this team. They need Goliath. We also, in this epic collection, run back into the Black Widow. The Black Widow makes her return, and she has a costume now. It's a very 1960s costume. Rarely has a character looked more 1960s than this character right here, Black Widow. This is good news for Hawkeye, because Hawkeye was in love with the Black Widow. And it turns out the Black Widow, she was villainous because she was brainwashed, but her great love for Hawkeye has overcome that. So we get some gooey love stuff in this epic collection. This is a fun epic collection. It was a good time to read this. The stories at this period, they're just a lot of fun. The adventures are fun. They don't always make a ton of sense, but that's okay. I'm not here for that. I'm not here for logical consistency. I'm here for fun Avengers stories, and you get that. The characterizations are really strong, I have to say. We got a bunch of bickering, upset heroes, but it works, and Stan Lee sells it. I feel a little bad for Goliath in this because I feel like it was unnecessary to put him through so much, but he did. Stan Lee always, or very often at least, feels like he has to give these super strong heroes an Achilles heel. Thor has to keep holding on to his hammer. If he lets go of the hammer for too long, he turns back into Don Blake. It's always something like that. And, we're getting that here with Giant Man, which is kind of annoying. It's unnecessary. But, it's okay. It adds drama. It adds drama to the stories. And this was a dramatic bunch of stories. The artwork, like I said, was all done by Don Heck. And the first time I read this series of stories, Hawkeye, once again, look at that. That's just a cool image of Hawkeye. I have to say, the first time I read this series of stories, I wasn't particularly impressed with Don Heck's artwork. But reading them again, because I think this run I've only read once, and I believe I read these stories in the Essential volumes, Marvel Essentials volumes, cheapy ones. But reading them again in this epic collection, I have to say I'm a lot more impressed with Don Heck's artwork this time out. And it doesn't seem to matter who's inking him. He's still looking good to me. And just the compositions and the images themselves, the panels themselves, the compositions of the pages are just really well laid out. He was a professional, this guy, and he had done a lot of comic book work. And that experience really shows through in these issues. So it was a fun batch of issues, and I enjoyed them quite a bit. So that's all I have to say about this batch of stories, Avengers Once an Avenger. Be sure to catch Steve Donoghue's channel and see what he has to say, and I will catch you next time.